DreAllDay.com.
Now tuned into the show where you learn the discipline to show up day after day to do the work, the confidence to put yourself out there boldly and authentically, and the mental toughness to continue showing up, doing the work, putting yourself out there, even when the success you've expected to achieve has yet to be achieved. And on top of all this, you get a huge dose of personal initiative, which is the go-getter energy that moves any one of us, including yourself, to go and make things happen instead of waiting for things to happen. And then we put all this together into a series of frameworks, approaches, insights, strategies, and techniques, all underneath the umbrella of one unified philosophy that is called Work on Your Game. My name is Dre Baldwin, also known as Dre All Day, and welcome to the show. And today's topic is quitting is a habit. Before we get started, two things. First of all, my text message number is down below in the description. When we start sending it out again, I'll be talking about it a lot more. Secondly, and you can text me right now, though, so we at least have your info. Secondly, Work on Your Game University. You want to work with me directly. We have different options for different people depending on where you're at, what you want to work on, what you're looking for. But if you listen to the show, you got a pretty good feel of my style, and you hear all the different things that I talk about, how I break things down, explain them. That is my superpower. If you want more access to that, join Work on Your Game University at the link in the description, which is simply workonyourgameuniversity.com. This topic, quitting is a habit. All of you are familiar with the concept of quitting. It means walking away from something before it has been completed. Now, while there is some strategic benefit to quitting in certain times and in certain places in life, the quitting that I'm referring to here today is the kind of quitting that we actually don't want to pick up as a habit. Quitting you do when you simply don't want to try anymore, yet you are still going after the outcome. See, that's the bad kind of quitting. If you don't want to try anymore, that might make sense because you don't even care about the outcome anymore. So if you were trying to build a birdhouse and you decided you don't want the birdhouse anymore, then it makes sense to quit, because why work on something that you don't want? But if you're walking away from something that you still want, and you're walking away just because you have been unable to achieve the outcome, we don't want to develop that into a habit. So quitting is a habit. So you do anything often enough, subconscious mind gets to the point and realizes that this is something you're going to do all the time, and it takes over and it makes it a habit to where you do it unconsciously. So this can work in a positive way. It can work in a not so positive way. So what happens when you're quitting in the negative way that we're talking about here today, it's when you run out of willpower and energy to keep trying to achieve an outcome, even though you still want it. So this is the kind of quitting that, again, we don't want to develop or cultivate this as a habit. So today, let's talk about how we make sure this doesn't happen. Point number one, today's topic, once again, is quitting is a habit. Life is being made easier and easier for all of us. For all human beings, life is easier now than it was 10, 15, or 20 years ago, for human beings as a general concept. Why? Because it's easier to access, start, and try things now than it was 15 years ago, and more easy than it has ever been. Ask your parents, how easy was it to start a business in the 1980s or 1990s if they didn't have access to people, if they didn't have capital, and let's just say those two things. You didn't have those two things. It was very difficult to start a business back then. But nowadays, any of you can start a business. And when I say a business, what I mean is you have customers who are paying you money. You can start a business from your phone at home, and you don't have to put any money up to start the operation. Whereas back then, you had to put money up. You had to do a whole bunch of paperwork. You had to probably know somebody in order to start a business. Now you can start a business with pretty much nothing. Now, technically, there were ways you could start a business back then. You could bake some cookies at home and start selling them to your next door neighbors. But get the spirit of my point. It is easier and easier to do things these days than it has ever been. As a result, there is more competition in the world to do things simply because it's easier to try. So on the surface, when you look around, it looks like everybody, quote unquote, is doing a thing because it's so easy for anyone to do that thing. So when I say competition, what I mean is other people who could start doing the thing. So it does appear that the competition level is very high, or the amount of competition is very vast. So let's just call it that. I won't even say the level of the competition because we can't speak for everyone's skill level. But the amount of competitors that are out there is a big number. How easy is it to start anything, as I just explained? When we talk about real competition, it's not the same as just people existing, but real competition is people who are actually good and seriously trying and capable of beating you. So that's what I mean when I say real competition. So competition could be, I have this show here. It comes out every single day, been coming out every day since 2016. This show that you're listening to right now. So my competition technically could be anybody who wants to start a podcast from some app on your phone and you just record it on your phone while you're driving to work every day and you upload it straight from your phone and technically you have a podcast. You have 6 episodes of your podcast already published. Are you competition to me? Technically, yes, because nobody can listen to both my show and your show at the exact same time. So technically you are competition. Now, are you true competition to me? The answer is no, because first of all, you haven't been in the game long enough. Secondly, just by the law of averages, you probably aren't that good. And those 2 points alone mean you're not real competition to me. So again, real competition means someone who's actually good, relative term. They are seriously trying, also subjective, and they're capable of outdoing you. Again, subjective. So who fits that description for you in the space that you're in? They are actually good. They are actually trying, meaning they're in the game and they're active in the game, and they are capable of, or maybe they already are proven to be better than you. Now, that level of competition is lower because anyone can try, as we already explained, but there are still only a few who fit this additional description of having all 3. They're good, they're trying, and they can beat you. Most people simply start things because they're easy to start. That's the competition I was referring to a moment ago. Anyone can start a social media account or a blog. People even start blogs these days. I guess you can start blogging, you can start TikToking, you can start podcasting, you can start YouTubing, anything that is easily accessible through a phone where you don't need anything but your own voice and your own ideas. Anyone can start any of these things today, right now. And people do start things because they're easy, but the reality is still most people do not follow through and finish on the things that they start. And this is the opportunity for people like you and I that we actually follow through and finish the things that we start, assuming that you're one of those people who follows through and finishes the things that you start. Give you an example. I mentioned podcasting. In late 2024, the last that I looked, according to data, there are 4.3 million published podcasts in the world. 4.3 million different shows in the world, not episodes, shows. Now, according to the data from podcastpage.io, out of that 4.3 million, 700,000, that's 1 out of 6, has released an episode within the last 12 months. So 1 out of 6 podcasts has actually released an episode anytime in the last year. So there's a whole bunch of podcasts in basically the podcasting graveyard, that we'll call it, or sometimes the podcasting nursing home, because sometimes the show's not dead, but the host takes a break. We do a lot of reach out over here, so we'll do reach out to some show, and their team or their host will write us back and say, well, I took a break from my show, haven't recorded since 2022, but we may come back in the second quarter of next year. I get messages like that often. So sometimes people are on vacation, and sometimes it's just completely over for those shows. In addition to the 700,000 that have published in the last year, less than half of those 700,000 has published more than 3 episodes. This illustrates my point. So 4.3 million shows, only 700,000 have published in the last year, and only half of that 700,000, let's just say 350,000, has more than 3 published episodes total. So people are starting stuff, not staying in the game long, and they've already dropped out and didn't even do much before they dropped out. This is my point. It's easy to start things, which is the competition, but most people don't follow through. So your opportunity is in simply not quitting after you started. If you don't quit after you start, the further you go and the longer you stick in the game, the less competition you have, because most people don't go far and most people don't stay in the game. So the longer you and further you can go on either of those, the more you eliminate any possible competition. Point number 2, today's topic, once again, is quitting is a habit. Number 2, I'm not saying all this to say that you should never quit. I touched on this in the introduction. Sometimes you will start things that you should quit. And there are several reasons why you should quit, because sometimes you're just in a place where you should not be. This is just not the right place for you. Or the time is not right for you. Maybe it could be the right place, but not right now. Or you're simply driving in the wrong vehicle. And my series on the 12 Work on Your Game commandments, there's actually 13 of them. One of the commandments is being in the right vehicle. The right vehicle means the right space for you to be in, given your talents, given your skills, your natural abilities. You got to pick the place that makes the most sense for you, your skills, talents, and your interests. Another good thing about today's world is that it's very easy to switch spaces and try different things throughout your life. I used to, before basketball, I played a little bit of football, never seriously played because I never actually got around to putting the pads on and hitting people. And then I played some baseball. Neither of those was the right vehicle for me. Now, had I tried other sports, like let's say golf, or who knows, maybe I might have been good at golf. I don't know, but I think leaning over to hit the ball might have eventually made for problems with my lower back, being I'm relatively tall, I'm 6'4". Wrestling, I never tried wrestling. My body's not made for that. My body is long and I have long limbs. So long limbed people were good at endurance sports and far distance movement sports like sprinting, distance running, basketball, volleyball, sports where you have to cover some type of range, even football, depending on what position you play, like defensive back or wide receiver. So my body wasn't made for wrestling, whereas people who are in the wrestling space or even MMA fighters, they'll be not all MMA fighters. They come in many different shapes and sizes, but definitely sports like wrestling, grappling sports. These are people who have short, generally squat bodies. They don't have to be that short, but their bodies are more compact. They have shorter arms, shorter legs, but thicker in those areas. That's the right vehicle for them. None of them would do too well trying to run 10K races, and I wouldn't do too well trying to wrestle with one of them. So you have to pick the space that makes the most sense for you. And we got to remember that in this era that we live in, you have plenty of opportunity to do this. Previous generations, again, ask your parents, previous generations were getting to one space and were pretty much stuck in that space for decades of their lives simply because the opportunity to switch and change something different was they were not nearly as ubiquitous, not as numerous, nor was it as easy to do as it is today. Just a generation ago, adults would get into a career in their 20s and they would stay in that career until they retired. In the world that we live in today, many of you are not still in your first career, despite your age. You might be 40 years old. You're already on your second or third career. I'm not talking about job, second or third different career. You started off doing this thing all the way over here. Now you're all the way over here. And then in between that, you were doing something that's all the way over there. You've done three completely different industries and you're not even 45 years old yet. All right, that happens these days. Whereas, again, in our parents' generation, people who are, let's say, over the age of 60, they were not doing that. They got into one space and that's where they were. They might change jobs, meaning you're in the same industry, you just move from one company to the next, but they didn't just completely change careers and throw away all the knowledge and experience they gained in one industry and just put that to the side so they can focus on building knowledge and skills in a whole different space. That didn't happen in a previous generation because, again, it wasn't easy to do. The world we live in today, it's very easy to do this. Very easy to switch from one to the next anytime you feel like it. So you don't have that problem today that though not us, but they, older generation, had of being basically stuck in a spot once you get there. I told you, I used to play basketball. Baseball wasn't the right vehicle for me. And the thing is, I didn't just quit baseball and do nothing at all. I quit baseball and moved on to something else. So understand that the universe does not like an empty space. It doesn't like a void. It will always fill the void. And the universe hates a vacuum, as they say, or abhors a vacuum. So if you have a habit of something that's taking up 2 hours of your day, and you decide to stop doing that habit and free up those 2 hours of the day, you must figure out what is going to fill those 2 hours. Because if you don't fill those 2 hours, something is going to fill those 2 hours. And if you don't choose it consciously and intentionally, whatever ends up filling those 2 hours are probably not going to be, usually it's not going to be something that you want. So you have to know when to quit, and then you have to find the right vehicle to replace the previous thing with. It's not always let me just do nothing and stop. There are advantages to that, and there are times to do that. I was actually talking to a coaching member today who was talking about this very thing, that maybe I just need to step back and do nothing for a minute instead of going and doing the next thing. And there are, again, depending on the situation, that could be a smart idea, it could be a bad idea, depending on your circumstance. So I'm not saying that you always have to be on something, but when you stop doing a thing, you must figure out what's going to fill that space. Even if filling that space is you sitting in, smelling the incense and meditating in a lotus position for 2 hours a day, something needs to fill that space, and you need to be intentional about what that is. Point number 3. Today's topic, once again, is quitting is a habit. Number 3, resilience, determination, persistence, and a willingness to stick to things are traits that most human beings do not have. Did I get you all this again? Resilience, determination, persistence, willingness to stick to things. These are traits that most human beings do not possess. It doesn't matter the age. So, on this understanding alone, your opportunity is in being the person who does have it. Remember that in life, the opportunity is always in the opposites. So if you notice something that most people do, your opportunity is in looking at, what if I didn't do that? you notice some way that most people are not, some description that would not fit most people, ask yourself, if I did fit that description, what would that do for me? Where's the opportunity? So even though there are caveats to the opposites, this opportunities and opposites doesn't, again, don't take everything that I say here literally. I want you to get the spirit of my point rather than dissecting the letter of my point. The spirit of my point is that the opportunity is in looking at what the masses do because they are average and trying to do the opposite of that because you don't want to be average. Right? That's the point. So, for example, you don't want to drive when you're driving in the United States, you don't want to drive on the left side of the yellow line because you know that's not the place that you're supposed to be. You know, when you're driving a car, we usually drive on the right side. So don't go drive on the left side just because the masses are all driving on the right side. Again, that does not, the caveats to the point do not negate the fact that there is a point. There is more opportunity going against the grain of the behaviors of the masses than there are in going with the grain of following the behaviors of the masses. You will gain more by going against what most people do than you will gain by going with what most people do. Now, this alone is enough for you to understand that quitting is not something that should be part of your regular behavior, if for no other reason than the reason that most people quit. So if you know that most people do a thing, you want to figure out ways to stop doing that thing. If you know most people don't do a thing, you want to figure out ways that you could implement that thing and maybe find some opportunity for yourself. So where is it in life that you may need to walk away right now? Maybe it's time for you to quit. But before you quit, what are you going to replace it with? If you stop doing that, what are you going to do? If you stop going in this direction, what direction are you going to go? You stop using your resources over here, where are you going to use them? Because if you don't use them, and again, the universe will fill that vacuum. You leave an empty space, the universe will find a way to fill that space, and often it'll be with something that you might not be too happy that you have. So let's recap today's class, which is quitting is a habit. Everybody knows what quitting is. It's walking away from something before it's completed. There is strategic benefit to doing this. There are times when it makes sense, but there are times when it doesn't. And we're talking about it. Point number one, life is being made easier and easier for all of humanity, which means it's easier to start, access, and try things than it ever was before. But human beings are still human beings. People are still generally lazy, and your opportunity is still going to be looking at what most people do, which is quit, walk away, stop trying. And as long as you don't quit, you stay in there and you keep trying, you will find opportunities for yourself, even if it seems like there are no opportunities right now in the moment. As podcastpage.io said, there are 4.3 million active podcasts. About 1 out of every 6 has published an episode in the last year. And even of those, less than half have published more than 3 episodes total. So the opportunity is just sticking to things. Number 2, this is not to say that you should never quit. There are times when you should quit. One of 12 work on your game commandments is being in the right vehicle. If you're in the wrong vehicle, you got to quit. If you're riding in a boat, but you're supposed to be on a plane, you probably need to figure out a way to get off the boat so you can get on the plane. Don't just keep doing something just because you've always done it or because everybody else is doing it. You need to get in the vehicle that makes the most sense for you, your interests, your aims, your talents, and wherever you plan on going in the future. And most people do not have the capacity or the wherewithal to examine what those things are for you better than you can. So the better you know it, then when you're clear, then you can go find the people who can actually help you because they usually are making themselves known. If you're this type of person, I can help you. You're that type of person, I can't help you. It should be clear who's who, and it'll be easy for you to find whoever your next person is. So in the world we're in today, it's very easy to switch spaces, to go from one thing to another in life. So if you're in the wrong vehicle, you're not stuck there for 40 years like maybe your parents were. You actually have the opportunity to move around and go do something different. Like I used to play baseball, played a little bit of football. Those are not the right vehicles. Got into basketball. Boom, right vehicle. Point number 3, resilience, determination, persistence, and a willingness to stick to things. Most human beings don't have these traits. So on this understanding alone, that's your opportunity. Opportunity is always in the opposites. So even though there are caveats to the opposites, like don't drive on the wrong side of the road just to prove that you can, the spirit of the point is that the opportunity is usually in doing the opposite of what the masses of people do. Why? Because you don't ever want to have too much of your behavior copying that of the masses of people. That said, make sure you text me. My number's down below in the description. And also, you're serious about having a straight talk, to the point, no fluff coach, and access to all of our trainings, all of our courses on everything from the mindset side to the strategic side to the business side, entrepreneurial stuff, everything you need to get your business going and running and having me as your coach, go to workonyourgameuniversity.com, link in the description. Work on your game. Dre, all